Hi, this is Lori from To the Trade. I don't have Niall at the today because he is on a trip to Italy for business. He's working with Shamin Taylor Smith on a special project. I'm very excited to be joined by Jonathan Rowland, though. Hi, Jonathan.
How's one?
So we just saw each other at KBiz. So lovely to see you and your wife. And I know you have such an extensive experience in the cabinet world. You are a cabinet rep for over 30 years. Tell us a little bit about yourself first. Just, give us the background.
Sure. Like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm a husband and father of four girls, first of all, and in the industry, started thinking I wanted to be an architect, found a designer in a Lowe's location over 30 years ago now that was struggling with the computer design software and realized it was something I was very familiar with and could embrace that challenge. And soon thereafter was helping to design kitchens using that software and helping train others right off the bat, and kind of fell into this industry and have loved it and have grown in the industry and have done anything from installations, project management. And then now for the last majority of my career now, I've been a manufacturer representative and consultant in the industry.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, you are a cabinet nerd. I mean, you know everything about cabinetry. You know everything about the industry. You're a valued partner to any brand who is thinking about cabinetry. I want, brands out there listening to realize they can contact you and work with you and designers as well, because you just are going to bring a level of expertise and an idea of where the designers need to go to really being thoughtful about cabinetry, because it's such a tough thing because it's so expensive. Once it's in there, people don't really want to change cabinetry often. I mean, it's expensive and it's time consuming, and there can be problems down the road if you're choosing incorrectly. It's a tough industry, and you've seen it come a long way. What is something that most people assume about cabinetry sales, but it doesn't really, isn't part of your job really? I mean, what are they assuming that you do versus what you actually do?
Right. I think it's been part of the term there, cabinetry sales. And that's why I called my company Rowland Cabinet Consultants instead of calling it a sales organization, because I do feel it's more of a consulting aspect than a lot of typical sales jobs, because there's so much detail in the industry. And, with most consumers in their life, maybe do one major remodel or build one house and have the kitchen to plan in that house, right? So
Yeah.
it's not something that is done often. So people don't really gain a lot of experience. Of course, I work with people that have done multiple kitchens, but overall the industry tells us it's like 1.1. It's just barely over one, that happened
Right.
for that in a person's life. So it's something they need to lean on experts. They need to lean on people that will be with them and give them all the things to look out for to make sure they're getting the best value and they're getting the best, like you said, long-term product that's going to work for them, their home.
Yeah, and that is tricky because you're seeing a lot of people come into those semi-custom, semi-homemade, or redoing the doors on on IKEA cabinetry on TikTok or Instagram. That must drive you crazy because of how much good cabinetry is out there.
Sure. I mean, it does to some extent. I mean, everybody has their budgets and they have, their level of expertise. Some people like getting their hands dirty and doing it themselves, which is great. I want more people and young people to join the industry and to get into it. And if it drives their passion into getting into the industry, great, maybe a good place to start. So that product, again, it has its place, right? Not everybody can afford the full luxury experience, but, definitely there's things you can do though. A lot of times people will reface or change their doors and not realize they could have maybe had a full custom kitchen for the cost of refacing. There's
That's what
so much
I was thinking
labor
too. I
involved.
mean, there are so many local little cabinet, I mean, it's harder and harder to find the local little
Yes.
cabinet builders out there that are, sometimes it's the same price.
Right. Yeah, the doors are the most expensive part of the cabinet. And that's maybe one thing a lot of consumers don't understand. And so when you change out just your doors, you're changing out the most expensive component. Then you're also having to deal with the fronts, the frames that are exposed, and the sides that are exposed. And the material to do that properly is very expensive as well. And then the labor to do all that, to measure everything and to make those changes is very expensive. I've literally seen jobs where people have spent almost double on just changing out their doors than they could with the brand new kitchen entirely. So it's kind of
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, I think it's just a lack of knowledge, that if
Mhm.
you don't know what you don't know, and it seems like it'd be easier just to replace doors. I think that that's a consumer knowledge hole that's missing right now. You mentioned something that I think is interesting. You'd like to see younger people come in. Is there an issue with getting quality cabinetry reps now in this industry?
Definitely something that, over my career, I have seen the workforce get older and older, which is good from one side of the coin where you have experience that's in the industry. But at a certain point, people age out and retire, and the next generation, so to speak, isn't necessarily filling those gaps as much. Technology is going to help, right, with AI and everything else coming in to kind of bridge that gap in some regards. But there still is a big need for representatives themselves. They have the experience for the designers and for installation. That's another big need in our industry is, good quality installers, and that's something that we're seeing that group age out more than anything else. It's a hard
Right.
job and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time to get really good at that job. And so that's probably the biggest concern I've had is on the actually installation side.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about the need for, people in trades for if the entire time I've been in this industry. I mean,
Right.
and it hasn't gotten better. It
I mean,
hasn't gotten better. We still
you
need
have
people in trade.
manufacturers working to try to, encourage local trade, schools and to bring in people and everything else. And, there's efforts have gone largely unnoticed and it hasn't moved the needle a whole lot because a lot of people just don't necessarily want to, do that kind of physical labor for their entire career. A lot of people are interested in moving into computers or technology versus moving into something that's a menial labor, right? That's probably one of the biggest challenges, just finding people that are willing to work with their hands every day, get dirty and tired and work hard, right? Just
It's hard
sometimes.
on your body for sure. So
Yes.
that I can imagine that. What do you think the biggest misconception homeowners have about working in the cabinet industry? What do you think they get wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them just maybe from familiarity just go immediately to like the big box stores and think they're getting the best deal. And I think a lot of times they go with that because of the financing more than anything else. It's just
Sure.
easy to go in there and get a credit card or limits the credit cards that they're offering through these larger box stores, we call them. But, a lot of times their pricing can be had at with the local designer directly or a local cabinet dealer or even a local cabinet shop, right? And you can get better quality cabinetry for the same price or maybe slightly more, but a much higher quality. That's probably one of the biggest misconceptions,
Yeah. You know,
is that those box stores are the best place to go to get their cabinets.
It's interesting you talk about the financing part because there is a company that I was going to be meeting at KBiz and I think I have an appointment with them later on this week who offers some financing for the trade industry. So designers could start to offer this financing to their own clients. Sometimes people, even people who have the wealth, don't want this big out of pocket expense. And maybe that might be an additional thing that designers can be offering to their clients. And it's very expensive, the design process. So sometimes people just want to move their money around in different ways. And that might be, an interesting offering. I want to see how that
Right.
rolls around, but
Agree. It can be helpful. And
yeah,
I've seen some financing options in the past, but that's probably, if there's some other ones that can come in and help in the market, it will definitely be a way that more people can feel like they can access, that part of the market to be able to get what they really want.
right, right. What do you think? We just go into KBiz. It was a very, very, very busy market. I
Well,
thought there were a lot of builders there, surprisingly, which always is a good sign for construction because if they don't usually show up unless there's real business to be made, and I saw whole firms there too. So not just like the main, owner of the construction company, but multiple, even their finance guy coming,
right.
so that usually is an indicator in the past that there's a lot of building going on. Did you feel that way at market too, or?
Definitely. No, I mean, I would say, the show was more well attended than I expected, which is great. Again, great sign for the industry. A lot of enthusiasm. And like you said, a lot of people there which is good, to get a better education. Some are obviously looking for maybe a more affordable supplier than they currently have, supply chain, or maybe some that are used to working through, dealers. Honestly, I'm seeing more and more builders are trying to work directly with manufacturers. There's some that do that and some that don't. So that's something for designers to consider, is whether their manufacturer partners they're working with are going to sell to the trades directly, or they're going to sell through them only, because there are some that will go directly to that builder or directly to that developer and bypass the designer or kitchen dealer. So you kind of got to be careful in that regard. But there's a need for that to happen, because sometimes the scale of the builder, needs to be able to afford to build at the levels they're building at. They have to go direct, right? There's enough business to go around, but just know finding the right partners is important.
It is tricky to find the right partners. When I was, making my way through, there were a lot of companies that were not a traditional company that I've seen before at KBiz, and some that had even a lack of distribution here in the United States, which I thought was an odd choice. It's why would you want to exhibit at KBiz if you're only, and then when probed, they were saying, we want the multifamily builders, which I just thought that was an odd angle. You have no distribution in the United States. You don't speak the language very well, and you only want this particular client.
Sure. And, that's something people need to think of. You may get the best price up front, but there's a lot of logistics challenges
Oh my
involved.
goodness. So many logistics
things
challenges.
there's a lot of things that can go sideways on a project. And if you need to get your materials, if you're waiting for them to come over via container, or paying for air freight is prohibitively expensive, so yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to think of. Cheaper isn't always better, of course.
It
And,
isn't.
you have to, having that local distribution is huge. And, getting product from overseas happens in our market all the time. There's some things that are only made overseas currently, and you have to source them. So that's not a problem. It's just making sure you have the right partners that have distribution and ways to deal with that on a better way here. If they're just, if you're just dealing over there and don't have anybody here to help you out, that can be very scary.
It can be. It can be. Was there something at KBiz you saw that was either exciting or concerning that you want to report back? Because I know you had your eye out.
Yeah. So I would say kind of in between that was interesting was a lot of the imported lines have really stepped up their game, which is good for the market overall. It puts pressure on the domestic manufacturers to up their game again. It used to be when the imports first came, you could get a good white shaker, maybe a gray shaker, which one do you want, white or gray shaker, right? And that's what the imports brought to the market at an affordable cost with a fairly quality product after some time. It took them a while to build up to that, but they've gotten fairly quality. The interesting thing was how sophisticated a lot of them gotten with a very modern, trendy color palette, more door choices, offering, riffs on white oak, in a micro shaker door from an import, and so things like that didn't happen 2 or 3 years ago. They've happened more and more. And then, I saw an import manufacturer with some beautiful finger coal, very contemporary cabinets that even wrap the corner of the island, very custom things that even semi-custom manufacturers aren't doing. And they're doing it at a container load imported products. It's very interesting to see.
Yeah. And do you think that there will be some problems with we can't predict tariffs really, but is that something that was on your mind for consumers when you were looking at the imports?
Sure. That's definitely something to consider. And then, just one thing with the imports, that they often will have, just quite honestly, a better finish than a domestic manufacturer. But we have to think, how are they accomplishing that? And if we're trying to be ecologically minded and sustainably minded, these finishes are using a ton of solids, is what they call them, in the finishes to make them so thick and beautiful, deep, appearance, especially on your painted finishes, not necessarily the best for the environment, because the solids are the things that our EPA has limited the amount that, our domestic manufacturers can put in. So the imports have an advantage because they don't have the EPA controlling that. But the disadvantage is it's not great for the environment. If you've ever smelled an import coming on the lots, it's very strong, the off-gassing that happens. So those are things you need to consider for health and for sustainability purposes.
Right, because you're going to be breathing that in for quite some time, for sure. Yes. Yeah. Do you feel like the cabinetry trends at KBiz feel more like marketing hype, or is there something that has real staying power that you saw that you were like, this is going to be around for a long time to come?
Sure. There's always the products that get hyped up. Where we've seen door styles come and go over the years. I mean,
Sure.
many years ago when I started the industry, there was a slab door with this oak finger pull. People thought that'd be around forever, and it was a 3 or 4 year trend, right? And then you look back now and you go into an apartment. Oh, you built that in 1998. What
Right.
year? They won't
Exactly.
know the year you built it. So being too trended can be an issue. Right now, the most interesting thing I'm seeing is that consumers are really getting what they want. A lot of that can be driven by social media and seeing things they see on social media. I had a big push for raised panel doors, which I hadn't seen a single raised panel job sold in months at one point. And then in the last maybe 3 months, I've seen 6 or 7 jobs come through where customers were asking me for samples. Hey, do you have any raised panel samples? I don't have any myself because I hadn't sold it forever, but I had customers asking. Apparently, there was a couple of Instagram and Pinterest posts that really set people off on looking at raised panel doors because it's different. It's not a lab skinny shaker, micro shaker, or a staker door. It's something different. You're
Yeah.
like, I want something different in my house. I like the way that looks.
I feel like shaker was just around for a really long time as just a standard, traditional. Of course, when it got thinner, that was something different. But I mean, it still feels like it's been here for at least 15 years,
It most
and
definitely, and white at one point was 70% of all of the sales in the cabin industry.
70.
70%. Well,
Wow.
multiple manufacturers all were in that 70% range for white shaker for a
Jeez.
number of years. It's definitely come way down from that. We're seeing a resurgence in wood stain colors and just overall color palette, seeing blues, greens, grays, less grays, but more beiges than whites now. So moving away
Right.
from the stark whites to more of a creamy white or beigey white, like an accessible beige kind of color, things like that. It's as a cabinet person, it's fun for me because it's not the same thing every time. Which white shaker do you want? The
Yeah.
bright white shaker or the more, the less white shaker.
'Cause it must get boring if it's the same, same, same. I mean, I
Right.
love when this particular market, I felt like there were a lot of unique shapes, a lot of timbered type, stone even. And, the Cosentino booth had just a ton of different kinds of shapes of using that, both Decton and the Cosentino product. I just thought it was interesting how much we're doing, what feels almost like a 70s resurgence of
Right.
that, like, very, stylized.
And that's something I think that might be a short-lived trend because it is very focused and it's something that stands out, right? Texture isn't going to go away, right? It's just,
No.
but this reading or timbre texture, I think is going to be a quick-lived, maybe a few year type of a trend that has a quick arc because we're already seeing the imports to start to embrace it. And as soon as the imports embrace it, the custom market doesn't want it anymore.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's true.
That's kind of the way the market goes. Once they've
What
already
is I've
brought it
always
in,
kind of wondered what that, how that affects cleaning too. I mean,
it's definitely,
so
yeah, definitely adds to cleaning and
yeah,
yeah, a lot of
maintenance.
dust pockets, right?
Right, and those little tiny, like, children fingers getting all, like, grime in those little crevices must not
Um,
be exactly a wonderful thing for
right,
your
which is
toe.
why shaker and slab and micro shakers have been so popular. Is there is an ease to cleaning and you can just real quickly shaker. I mean, it's really a timeless store if you think about it. You
Sure,
can go
yeah,
back to Victorian era kitchens and they had a shaker style and a lot of their inset shaker. Craftsman style was a lot of
yeah.
a lot of shaker doors. Maybe there was white oak back then and with a lot of that and where it's come back around. Shaker's kind of a timeless thing. And that's why it does have such longevity and really a white sugar kitchen. It's been around forever, right? So that's why it kind of did last so long in our industry, and it'll always kind of be around. But right now, like I said, individuality is really the biggest trend I can say. Is that
Yeah.
people are getting what they want, which are great. People are ordering exactly what they want. They're not worried about just getting that white sugar kitchen everyone wants. There's some people that's what they want, great. And there's others that want a raised panel or they want a more decorative door or they want that micro shaker or a slab ultra modern kitchen and it's great that people can get what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually in New Hampshire have a Shaker Village as a tourist attraction that people can go visit, and it's like stepping back in time. Were there any materials or finishes that you were sort of surprised about it, the showcase that Kate does?
I'll be honest, it kind of was what I expected to see, where you had, a lot of white oak was shown, a lot of, blues, grains, and then the color that I had already seen to start to pop up with some designers and I work with, was this mauve tone. Definitely a great pop of color. Not going to be a mainstream color in our industry by any stretch of imagination, but on more daring designers are going to, implement that into their designs. But that's something that, quite honestly, I've been seeing that for the last year or so. So it didn't surprise me, but it was reinforcing that that's kind of where we're at right now in the industry.
Yeah, and I saw we went to go see you at we had a interior design community tour, and we went to multiple brands, and we stopped at your to visit you, and there was a caned cabinetry front there. You had a lot of mixed materials within the same cabinetry.
Right.
I thought that was actually kind of innovative, and I didn't really see a lot of that in other cabinetry brands. I was kind of keeping my eye out to see if that was unique, and it seemed to be. So is that something that you've suggested to clients? Is like
Yes,
some
definitely. I mean, again, texture is something that does add a warmth to a space, right? We had very sterile white kitchens for a while. The people were
yeah,
wanting to bring back the wood grains and everything, and having multiple color tones adds a further warmth to the space, and it lets you decorate around it, design around it more easily with having multiple tones to pull from. Yeah, and that's something that I was happy to see, and kind of work with the brands to say, "Hey, here's the things that we're seeing in the market," and they showed all the kind of the top trends. And it's not for everybody, but it's great for them to get a picture of these little vignettes where they can see maybe this is what, this is the style that I like. This is the look. This is a more sleek, tuxedo type kitchen, white and black, or,
right.
and here's something that's a lot more rustic, naughty woods. And there's everybody has their own individual taste, and it's great that, the market's kind of embracing individuality.
I love it. I mean, I'm kind of was very, I think that coming off of that gray trend that everyone jumped on to a little too wholeheartedly. I mean, literally everything, every surface in their home being gray
That burned
flooring,
out real
gray
fast.
cabinetry,
I've ordered
gray.
2 to 3 year trends that came and went, and if people were
Or it
just,
got tired too fast online. I mean, I think I was sick of it in a week because it does feel a little bit prison-like,
Mhm.
I mean, it felt, a little depressing in a time that was already a little bit tumultuous in the world. I mean, if you're stuck inside because of COVID 24 hours a day and you're staring at gray walls, it's a little depressing, I think. And I can understand why people moved away from that trend. And it's exciting to see wood cabinetry coming, the stain coming back into play. You mentioned that when we were out to dinner that last year it was around 15% of the total market. And what did you say it was going to be, you think, next year?
Yeah, so depending on the manufacturer, I'd say because some manufacturers didn't even offer much as far as stains, and they were maybe at the lower end of that. But I would say in the market altogether, I'd say somewhere between 15 and 25%. I would expect this year, which is a huge change from a couple of years ago where it was 3 to 5% of the market was stain. So it's a major shift to see that happening where people were embracing the stain again. And the cabinetry market's a $5 billion market, so you look at the difference in 3 to 5% of that number versus 25%.
Right.
That's a lot of stained cabinetry coming into people's office.
It is. I mean, is there a particular stain you're seeing more like darker or lighter?
Yeah.
What,
Again, it's more. I'm seeing a little bit of everything. I'd say overall the trend is definitely towards the lighter stains. Especially with white oak, people are liking to keep that fairly natural in appearance and getting rid of the reddish tones that are still in white oak and trying to keep it very very blonde and not take on like again any of the reddish. So any of the stains that are accomplishing that stain to more of a brown or neutral tone. But that's right now, those are the top stains. But I mean, if you go around the store, you'd also see there's a bunch of dark stains and with black, which, black is a very hard color for cabinet doors. It shows dust, grease, scratches, So if you can take a wood grain that has a nice texture to it and you stain it very dark and an ebony stain or, or espresso, a very deep, dark brown or almost black stain, it's a really great option that will give you more long-term durability with the product. And it won't show the dirt and dust and grease that you get from a kitchen. So it's a really smart choice, a long-term durable choice.
I love that. I love that. And I think that it's exciting to see people turn back to some sort of like traditional feeling with cabinetry, but there are a lot of, and that, the panel ready doors too are very, very popular. I mean, more and more people want the appliances to just be part of the kitchen. You don't really see them. Are you finding that too?
Definitely working with a lot more handle ready doors. And that's something I think we've talked about a little bit, getting the industry together to talk about that, because there's some discrepancies in specifications online sometimes. There's a lack of specifications. There's a lot of people wanting to do these very flush applications where maybe the doors won't open properly when they're built in fully flush. So you have to consider that into your, design aspect. So yeah, panel doors are hot right now. And that's something where we as an industry need to communicate between the appliance manufacturers and cabinet manufacturers and installers to really make sure we're all on the same page and getting these details worked out so that people can get the exact look they're going for. Because if you're looking for a full flush look and then you end up having to pull your appliance forward just slightly so those doors can swing all the way open and you can get your, your vegetable trays or whatever pulled out, now you've got this unsightly look where everything else is flush and you've got your refrigerator bumped out at 3/4 of an inch and
Yeah,
just
that's
ruins
an
the whole
issue.
look, right? Yeah, so rate your entire look.
Yeah. Are you working with, I mean, do you work with some of the appliance manufacturers? I think that, we work with some occasionally for interior design community. It might be something that we've been kind of experimenting down the road with this idea. We're this year we're going to be working with Design Edge to do interior design community conference and have really quality content and have some real great conversations between interior designers and manufacturers. But long-term goal too is we would like to see some of the designers having a retreat, really getting in-depth information from each other about how they're billing, how they're handling increasing profitability, that kind of thing. And the same thing on the manufacturer side. We'd love to do some retreats that are, kind of breaking down those barriers and how can we work better together, because so many of us are, in the same space, but it would be interesting to see if we could overcome some of those issues.
I've had
So by
old
just
discussions within, some Zoom calls we've had with groups, with interior designers and manufacturers. And then, a lot of discussions happen on, like Facebook forums, for example,
sure.
where these groups, we kind of all get together and we empathize and we kind of come up with solutions to maybe a designer that's experienced a problem with with the hinge issue on a refrigerator or something like that. That's something that, I would love to see more of that happening, more collaboration in the industry between the different manufacturers so that, everybody's on the same page and we're giving the consumers the information they need, the designers the information they need, and they let people make the right choices and have the products look the way they're supposed to look and function, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the market in general, we're still seeing some, fairly sleek modern styles, but I would say that traditional is having a moment in the market. Do you think that traditional style is currently increasing, and where do you think that's heading?
I think I think we will see more of it. I think it's a little bit of a pushback from the sterile, slab and shaker look that people just maybe got tired of, burnout,
Right.
seeing it all over everywhere. And, again, I've seen a race panel come back recently. I've seen the wood grains come back. I think that all leads to a little more of a traditional look. And so I expect that to grow throughout this year. Skinny shaker slab, they're not going away ever. But, we're going to see more of these others come in and be at least a meaningful part of the industry, where in the past they were such a minutia. A lot of manufacturers started discontinuing around that. Going more traditional and even to country again in some areas where
Yeah.
you're getting arched doors. And, a lot of manufacturers discontinued all their arched doors. So,
Right.
and so now they're having to reintroduce arched doors again. It's
Right.
an interesting cycle that you get in this industry.
It feels like it's a big influence from European culture
Mhm.
too, like the French country, the English countryside, cottage kind of feel to it, that in some of the architecture out there, it's completely in place and it
Mhm.
feels a little bit more, timeless. I've seen, I remember seeing a designer post that they had this stone cottage that they renovated for a client, and the cabinetry that they chose in the kitchen was what you'd think would be in a stone cottage. It looked very like apothecary
Right,
cabinetry,
right,
and it felt like it had a lot of copper and a lot of really interesting details. And this designer was dismayed because the house sold, new client moved in, hired a new designer. And as you can imagine, like it went from that, which was very authentic to the house, to what looked like I'm just going to say like a white Barbie kitchen. No, very high gloss cabinets,
right.
all white, everything. And, this beautiful vintage home that it just, and I mean, I love that people have the ability to choose what they'd like, but it
Sure.
also think sometimes we're a little bit too influenced by, what is out there and
Right.
what is trending, and not really respecting the architecture that we're living in. And I mean,
Agreed.
how do you feel about that? I mean, sometimes the house does not match
Yeah. No, I
what the
walk in
kitchen looks
homes
like.
all the time. I mean, a big trend I saw over the last decade, I would say, would be to take row houses in DC and, homes in Richmond, Virginia that are very historic. They have this great, history. They're on the National Register, and then you walk in and, you'd expect to see this really, like an insect kitchen or something that really fits the look and feel of the warmth of the home. And you walk in and it's like you said, it's a high gloss white kitchen or high gloss orange kitchen. They're just wild, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, fine, personality, great, you can do that. But I love to see when people look at the home itself and build their cabinetry in to fit the house. I mean, it's silly. People a lot of times don't think about it. To me, it's the only thing that stays in your house when we leave. In Europe, it's different, right? They take their cabinets with them. They go from house
Right.
to house. In the US, we keep our cabinets in and we take our furniture. You can redecorate very easily a house, but the cabinetry stays. So the
Right.
cabinetry should match the look of the home, really. If that's something that is often neglected, people
Right.
just build to the trends instead of building to what the home style is. So
And it's
an ultra modern home should have an ultra modern kitchen, and a traditional
sure.
home should have a more traditional kitchen.
I agree. I agree. And respecting the architecture, and you're going to be just happier when it feels like it's in place. And there are a
Exactly.
lot of designers that can do some really unique things to bring in history. I just was after KBIS went to Nashville, not Nashville, but Jackson, Tennessee, to a new showroom called Home Soul. And it's mostly furniture, but they really blend like antiques with really high quality furniture, and stuffed, taxidermies everywhere. It's like a really very southern thing. But a lot of these beautiful, beautiful antiques and pieces that kind of look antique because they're from Mexico and meant to look that way. And it's just really interesting when people mix something that isn't super traditional, but still feels like it's in the place of
Yeah,
where.
like you said, you could take brand new cabinetry and create a look of a vintage piece. I mean,
Oh,
there's
absolutely.
a lot of manufacturers offer distressing finishes that can create a look of a time worn piece. A lot of times I'll see in a way that somebody maybe can incorporate, their taste and the look of the house is a lot of times they'll see like the basic, maybe white shaper type perimeter, and then the island can be a look like a piece of furniture, whether it's walnut or a painted finish with some distressing, and it looked like the piece of furniture that's maybe been in the house forever. Maybe it's,
Right.
it feels like the original, cabinetry that you retain, so that's a way that you can maybe compromise sometimes on that and add some more to a space. So it's not just this bright white, sterile environment.
Now, customization is really important. What are some like things that designers could do to customize that might not be adding to the budget too much? They want to give their client something unique, something special, but they don't want to add a tremendous, line item to the cabinetry budget.
Sure. I mean, honestly, just the look, it's a simple thing is the hardware. I mean, the hardware can really change the entire look of a
I
kitchen
agree.
from
I
from
agree.
traditional to contemporary and vice versa. And that's something that it doesn't have to be super expensive. Obviously, there's some very high-end hardware out there, but you can find some great looks at an affordable price and change your entire space with that. From the cabinetry side of things, just having the storage, for everything. The look of a kitchen can really be destroyed with a bunch of stuff all over the place, right?
Right. Right.
Or having a way to hide away those things easily and conveniently is important. To keep wage in place, having easy ways to put away things without having to bend down and bring heavy things up and down. And, we're seeing more and more countertop type level storage where the cabinets come all the way down. You're able to put things behind doors to store them. That's very popular. It doesn't have to be super expensive. There's definitely a bunch of different ways to handle it. There's
I
some
love an appliance garage. I think that those are the coolest thing ever. I mean, just out of sight, out of mind.
There's some
The
amazing high
cabinetry back
tech
there.
solutions. Yeah, there's amazing high tech solutions. Doors that fold away and
I
are
love that.
and automatic doors and all that. But you could also go old school and have a swing door, just have some place to put something behind that door on your countertop, close the door, or a lift up door that's not too expensive. That's one of the biggest things I think people can incorporate as a way to is storage and a way to hide away things so that they can have that clean look they're maybe desiring.
Yeah.
And also it's functional. It's much
I
more.
mean, I will tell you, never, ever, ever totally cheap out on hardware because, I mean, even in my own cabinetry here, I was really wanting to spend time looking for the right pieces. So I bought some like cheap hardware off of Amazon while I was waiting to figure out what I wanted because I really wanted two-tone set and I was really being picky about it. And I couldn't even last a week touching it. Felt so gross in your hand to touch it. I was like it was giving me the look I wanted, but the feel was horrible.
Right.
And I ended up like deep diving and finding with the designer that I love, finding the exact hardware I wanted. And I immediately bought it. I moved it way up because I was like, I can't even touch this every day.
Right.
This feels awful in my hands. And you'd be surprised, sometimes things look pretty, but they're just, if you're going to be touching it every single day, multiple times a day, it needs to feel right in your hand. I think, in terms of finishes, is there anything that is, new technique to improve the longevity or durability of cabinetry now that you can tell our designers?
Yeah, so it would be more of a different material. I mean, paints have a certain level of durability, but a lot of people just don't realize that, painted finishes are very susceptible to water damage, and it's amazing. You walk into a kitchen that was done, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and around their sink cabinet, around their trash cabinet, the cabinets look like they've been there for 20 years. They're very broken down because while the finishes are extremely durable, they can hold up to chemical spills and a lot of spills in the kitchen. But if the water isn't wiped up, the water sits on the finish and it actually slowly, softens and dissolves the strength of the finish. And then at that point, just barely touching the finish can cause chips and scratches. And then you speed up the process because then the water infiltrates underneath the finish. And then it's game over. You have to refinish the door, right? Once the water can get in behind the finish, it's going to block the finish out, causing the peel and scratch them. What I'm seeing is more of a move to the composite materials, some of the man-made materials, even with wood grain, there's plenty of new materials on the market that give a beautiful look of like your riffs on oaks and, but they have products out that now the edge banding can look like real wood versus being a very plasticky looking, piece on the side of the door. It can continue the grain around the corner. As we'd be looking at the door, it's going to have a look and feel of a real door. Those are a lot more durable, long term. They're going to hold up to, day-to-day wear and tear, and a lot more than a painted finish. But they're also offering these in super matte paint colors and matte paint colors and gloss paint colors, So that is a finish that I think you're going to see over the next, 5 to 10 years, really take off these types of TFLs and melamine type of materials that can definitely give you a longevity. And honestly, IKEA is kind of one of the ones that had led the way with that. You mentioned them earlier, and they've had that look for a long time. There are some better, materials than, and more durable than what they're using in some cases for, because that's a price point product versus you can get some nicer materials. You can get some that are self-healing. You get a scratch in it, you can actually use them like a warm iron and rag and rid of the scratch. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff out there in the market.
I love that.
Very cool stuff that's available. I think we're going to see that over the next few years and over the next decade. A lot more of that material come in. They'll do a lot more to mimic the look of real woods. And right now the shaker doors don't look as great because they have seams, but I'm seeing more and more that are built seamless as the technology improves. So stuff like that, I think you'll see, that help that material to get more into the marketplace. And a lot of people You mentioned the touch and feel. A lot of people are liking the look. If they're in a more contemporary or transitional home, they like the look and feel of the handleless heart, where they don't have any handles at all. And then they're using the touch latch type of
Oh, I
systems,
love
whether they're
that.
mechanical or electrical. You have to think though, with a painted finish or a wood stain, you're putting your dirty fingers and your greasy fingers on the cabinetry. And over time, that can wear the finish down. Whereas with these handling materials, they're much more durable. So if you are somebody that wants that handleless look, clean look, you really want to lean toward these TFL or melamine type products that are going to last you much longer term as far as a clean looking, brand new look
I hadn't really
product.
thought of that. That's a good nugget for the designers because, when you're talking cabinetry with your client, you should be talking about how they utilize it in order to find the best quality material.
Right.
And you're such a great resource for that too. I've told designers for years, just go to write to Jonathan if they have any questions, even, concerns too. Hey, I don't know if this is going to be popular in a year. I want to know that what I'm putting in my client's house, they're not going to be upset with me, because it's gone away and is no
Sure.
longer trendy, this is a huge investment. The industry is facing everything from supply chain disruption to fluctuating material costs. What's the biggest unseen challenge affecting manufacturers and suppliers today?
I mean, everybody's talked about tariffs. That's kind of an obvious one. One of the things I brought up earlier was, the import products and the way they're able to, go to market with,
I know.
the difference,
But that sounds scary. I think that's really, I mean, it can be intimidating for a designer to work with those companies.
sure.
For certainly if they're not able to find a rep that would be the go between, because there's a lot of logistics at hand when you're trying to do, especially if that importer has limited distribution here in the United States or has very, problematic distribution. Would you say is how would they would handle that?
Again, making sure that you have either a manufacturer representative that you trust, or there is some level of distribution. I mean, there's a chance that you might work with somebody that is new to the market, and things go well and smoothly, but you are taking a chance, right? Whereas if you do have that network built in, there are always groups bringing in products that have inventory here. So if something goes wrong, to pull from that inventory. That's really important a lot of times, whether it's just components or, pieces and parts versus having to wait for something to come. And I've heard of projects that, they had maybe one of the containers get damaged, and, they had to wait for the products to come or pay for an amazingly expensive air freight charge to get the materials in, or they had to find somebody to make the material locally to match, which is an extremely expensive thing to match somebody else's product. And as I've mentioned before, sometimes you literally can't legally match it because of the solids they're using versus what you're able
Right.
to use in your finishes. So your finishes aren't going to match the look of that product. So then you're really stuck waiting for that material to come in, from overseas. There are legitimate, there's a lot of, German and Italian companies that do a great job, and they're coming more into the country, and there are, companies that are doing a good job incorporating, foreign products that have a big distribution base, and they have their facilities here, and are putting things together here, maybe sourcing a lot of it globally. You can, usually trust on those a little bit better versus the ones that are, maybe working, directly. There's some risk involved. You might be able to save a little bit, but you also might get really caught.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I think that for designers they should absolutely exercise caution if they're trying to import themselves, and any consumer trying to do that too. I mean, you have no recourse if something goes wrong. You
Yeah.
have
I mean, I'm constantly approached on LinkedIn
Oh,
for,
I'm sure. I
for
am too.
companies
It's nuts.
to, yeah, for me to bring in sourcing from, Vietnam or Malaysia, or, any number of, different companies, countries, and their numbers look phenomenal. And, what the problem is, you're paying up front a lot of times for the entire cost of the container, the materials and the container itself. It's a huge upfront investment, and you don't even know who you're working with overseas other than maybe a green call or WhatsApp. So it's
Right,
a
right.
lot of risk involved there. It's just somebody may not follow through. It's not something that, there are people that do it and do it successfully, but, those are the people we want to work with, the ones that have the experience versus maybe somebody that's trying for the first time to bring something in, and, maybe it goes well, maybe it doesn't, right? So, you
Right.
got the way the risk reward scenario there.
Yeah. Consumers are really educated right now. I think because of Instagram, TikTok, they get a lot of information about cabinetry and interior design in general. Is this too much information, and are they creating is that information creating unrealistic expectations for the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, the information they get is just enough information to be dangerous.
Right.
Or the
Yeah.
way I like to say it, to where they don't get like the true talk, like I said about, the painted finishes being a, challenge at your sinks and your, and at your
The
mesh
truth.
cabinets.
That's just the truth. Yeah.
So they, I'll say it's a hard conversation to have, right, with somebody to say your new product might look bad in a few years. But my little tip has always been when you're designing a kitchen, order an extra door for your trash cabinet, order an extra door and drawer fronts, for your sink base. And then when those products inevitably have a problem 2 to 5 years down the road, the customer can put that new door on that's aged gracefully along with the rest of the kitchen. And now you have an exact matching door that can put on, have a handyman come in or do it themselves if they're handy. And they now have a brand new looking kitchen that can last them another 5 to 10 years. And then at that point, typically the trends have changed and it's time to remodel anyways. But versus having to redo their entire kitchen because a couple doors look bad or bring, somebody in to try to match it. And it ends up being a real challenge. So
That's smart.
that's a
That high
small,
traffic area,
uh,
just make sure you have,
it's a
you know,
small upfront expense that a lot of designers can really, I think, build some credibility with their customers by having those discussions up front and just including that in their pricing. They don't need to tell them, hey, I'm going to order these doors. Just do it, give it to them and explain why after the fact. And then, the customers will be thrilled that they have had that foresight for them, when it inevitably happens.
yeah, I love that. What do you think the perception of custom cabinetry is? Do people still feel that it's prohibitively expensive? And what are your tips for custom cabinetry?
Well, right. I mean, I think the word custom, immediately, people think of expensive, right? And
Right.
there are different levels of custom cabinetry. And the booth you tour with me, is less expensive than some of the semi-customs in the market. So you have to really look around, shop around and see, work with designers that you can trust and that can explain kind of the different options that are out there. The interesting thing I've actually seen, just something that's interesting on my end, you'll see cabinet companies call themselves custom when they really aren't. And even, local shops will, a lot of people call a local shop full custom, right? They may not realize you go to this shop and you watch them build their cabinets. They might be spraying their cabinets outside in the raw environment, getting, dust and dirt in the finish, or they might be spraying them in the house, which is, you don't want all those VOCs in your house from them spraying the cabinetry in your house.
Right.
So to me, that's not custom. Custom is a manufactured cabinet with a high quality baked on finish. But different people have different, ideals for what custom is. To me, a custom cabinet's going to allow you to change down to the nuance of your edge profile on your door, to change the width of your stiles and rails on the door, the center panels, any color paint that you want, any color stain, including, I work with manufacturers. You can send in your flooring if you want to match a cabinet piece to your flooring, or if you want to make it, contrasting, you can send that in and they'll create a stain for you. That's custom to me. A lot of manufacturers will call themselves custom just because maybe they offer Sherman's colors or something. And hey, we're custom.
Right.
That's not
Right.
custom. It's a
Or it's not
box
custom.
cabinet it's a box cabinet with options. Sure.
Right. Right. Do you think that the ready to assemble cabinetries are getting a little bit more high-end look? It feels like they
Yes.
are. I think IKEA's again maybe leading the way on that. I'm seeing a lot of what looks like high end, but
Well, and that's
I can just tell you, I have a family friend of mine who is currently, her house was built, I want to say in the 80s, and she's currently keeping all of her things that she has in her cabinets in bookcase shelving because the cabinets are literally falling apart. I mean,
right.
they're just falling apart. And this is contractor grade,
Mhm.
you know, contractor grade everything in this, development.
Right.
And I wouldn't say that I mean, 80s is a long time ago, but not so long ago that the cabinets should be falling apart,
Right.
falling off the walls. I mean, that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
What do you think is the ready to assemble and the ready-made cabinetry always going to perform like that now? Or Are there better pieces than others? And just because
There's
it's a high end
definitely,
look, is it dangerous to maybe specify that?
yeah, I mean, there's better brands of RTA type cabinets, and if the homeowner's doing it themselves, then they have to properly, assemble and install them, or you could have cabinetry falling off the wall. I mean, so there's something that we considered in making sure you have quality, installation going on. There's different levels. I mean, I've seen, RTA cabinets that look beautiful. I have a fantastic finish again because they're made overseas without the EPA and they're able to do that. But, some of them look great and have good, worse tenon joints and dados and pocket screws and all the things that you get on American custom cabinetry. They're doing that. So those can be some very nice box constructions, very durable. That's a small part of the RTA market. Most of them are put together with brackets, and that's not as durable.
Right.
And or it's unsightly where you look at, they'll have a glass cabinet and you see these ugly metal brackets inside, right? Which ruins the whole
Right.
look. That's something they have adapted more of the trends. Like I said, I saw that at the show where they even have the white oak and even some of the reeded
I
doors
saw the
or
same thing. There's a
over
lot of
doors.
that.
So they have moved very far forward in their following the trends that's concerned. But the interesting thing is I have, domestic manufacturer that I worked with that comes in less expensive than an RTA for a fully assembled cabinet. There's
Why are you doing that work then?
yeah, right. So,
Sure.
exactly. Why are you doing that work? And why are you using an imported product that might be made, quite honestly, with slave labor for all you know,
Right.
versus working with the domestic manufacturer who can support the domestic, of your employees at your local cabinet facility, that are American
Right.
workers. And there are things that you can do to work with people like that. It just takes
And
some shopping around, talking to designers, talking to people like myself that work in the
right.
industry and finding those things out.
So every designer needs a Jonathan to be able to call because I mean you do want to make sure that you're making these choices correctly and you can navigate because every I'm you really do know every cabinetry company there is here in
I
the
probably
United
don't know every single one,
States.
but they're because there's literally hundreds and hundreds in the US alone, and worldwide there's more. But I do take it, very seriously, and I love to learn this industry. Like you said, I'm kind of a cabinet nerd. I love to
Yeah.
research it. In the evenings, I'll go on social media and see what the next big thing is. I take save a bunch of posts and and I also love answering people's questions. It's kind of what got me into being more of a consultant than being just the cabinet rep, just being a sales guy, right? So being able to answer these questions and being able to, walk somebody through something, and put them in the right direction for the product that's going to work in their home. I enjoy that. And just finding somebody that can do that for you is important. And it isn't just going to try to sell you what they could sell you, but give you something that's going to work best for you, right?
Also that deep knowledge that will help the designer be able to move the client in the right direction because I think it's very easy to get swayed by social media, what the
Right.
new trend is. And like you said, I mean, it might be something that they're only going to do one time ever in their
Right.
lifetime. And so if they're able to choose something for their home once and that's it, you want to make sure that they're choosing something that has the durability and the longevity that they would be really requiring, even though they might be really fascinated by something like the reeded cabinets, the
Right.
tambour cabinets that look so cool. But then, maybe in 5 years, those are completely outdated. No one, and people will be like, oh, they designed their kitchen and,
Smart. A smart tip with something like that would be to maybe, incorporate the reeded look, maybe on your island or maybe a couple of doors and
sure.
or maybe even order the other doors that match in the same material at the same time. And if those doors go out of style, which they inevitably will, you can switch the other doors out and so
That is
forth.
so
So,
clever. That is so
then
clever.
you can get the current trendy look that you want right now. And then when the trend fades, you can redo that kitchen for maybe, a few $100s of doors that you've ordered along with your kitchen
Right.
initially. And now you have a kitchen that's going to be
And
timeless and
that's a good
easy to sell.
upsell for the designer too, because they can
Right.
just say, look, like we want to protect your investment. This is very cool. I know why you like it, but it's going to have its day and it's going to
Sure.
be gone. So here's an option where we're going to order the standard doors as well. And when you're sick of this in a few years or you think it's outdated, you can just kind of and there are a lot of like interesting applications with doors now too, where people are kind of like putting in temporary pieces that feel that they can slide out, switch out
Sure.
to
Well, I
make those
think
trends
we're
go in and out, you know?
one of the biggest things that people could do is a door that's prepped for glass, not a mullion door like the door behind me, but just a full, open for glass, we call it, where the center panel of the door is going. You can then take and you can put glass, it can be frosted glass like behind me. It can be a stained glass. It could be, you can do reading. You could do, a readed panel could be put in. You could do some type of acrylics to create a wild pop of color. You can put a thin stone in, some Vecta material to create that. And, you can put leather in that. I mean, you can put metal mesh. There's some, mirrors. There's a number of inserts. So that really can be where you can play with things, and change that out and change the look. And then maybe when you're ready to sell, just go back to a clear glass or a frosted glass or, even, just a more basic panel, right? So
Yeah,
that's something
temporary.
where it gives you a chance to really have fun and bring in some interesting textures and looks into the kitchen without a huge amount of money and, without, locking yourself into a trend where you can't change it later.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think AI is going to be affecting this industry? I'm really curious. A lot of people are talking about it from the, rendering side, but I'm
Sure.
curious how you see that coming in right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's already groups that I saw a presentation last year, a year ago at KBiz, and then had a follow-up presentation with a group that was doing a lot of AI and just taking a picture of somebody's kitchen and immediately getting them 5 or 6 different looks, from that kitchen. Now, it's not to the point of putting together a detailed, to the quarter inch or 8 penance or 16
Right.
fold plan, but it gives them the overall quick look and gives them to say, this is what I would like to see in my space. I think that's great. And I think it's a useful tool that designers should embrace and be able to have as well, just to be able to quickly move from somebody from a, starting point of, I don't even know what I want to, oh, that looks great in my kitchen, right? So that might be the first step. And then from there, you need to design and get into all the details and the minutia that, there are many, many details that are involved in the kitchen remodel or new construction project. But having that to start is great. I'm sure, we're not far away from these programs auto designing in a pretty sophisticated kitchen. I don't see that being more than 3 to 5 years off with all the design software that we use and everything being cloud-based. So they have, tens or hundreds of thousands of designs that they have in the cloud. And at some point, advanced computer learning is going to be able to put that together and figure out how to do these designs. So that's something I talk to my designers now. Hey, you need to develop more than just the design part of your business. You need to add more tools to your arsenal so that you can, help people with selections. You can help people, pulling together the entire project versus just doing the design. Because if all you're doing is design, eventually we're going to be replaced. They will be replaced by computers at
Right.
one point in the next, and the next 10 years, definitely, but probably before that.
Do you think that in looking into the next decade, that is the major disruptor, or do you think there'll be something else?
I would say that's probably probably the major disruptor. I mean, there could be other things as well. I mean, we're a more global economy, so that's going to be things. I mean, you look at the growth of the global brands to the, domestic market. That's going to be something that'll change things entirely. Right now there's 3 major, brands and a couple others that are slightly below that as far as the domestic manufacturers and all their ancillary brands as part of those conglomerates. Now we're seeing a lot more, companies coming in from overseas. There's multiple that have, showrooms and locations throughout the US and they're growing and, so those will be disruptors as well. I mean, there's a bunch of different things, but I think AI and computer learning and all that is probably the biggest overall disruptor we'll see because it's going to allow consumers kind of an Amazon experience that they're all liking now, where you can
Right.
point and click and order something without having to necessarily go into a showroom. So that's where designers, to me, need to become more of that, boutique or concierge type service to be able to set themselves apart. I liken it to travel agents. There used to be travel agents on every corner as you drove down the road when I was younger, which dates me a bit. And, there would be everywhere. And then, now most of it is done via, these web-based tools, right? People book their own trips, but I'm seeing a resurgence lately where people that can give a higher level of service are starting there. I'm seeing more and more travel agents. And a networking group I was in locally a couple weeks ago, I met, a travel agent and, and she was doing a great job of really selling her service, and getting that better experience and being there with questions you have while you're on your trip, a quick phone call, right, to some real person, right? And
Oh, absolutely.
that experience is going to be big. So we're going to have to do the same thing in our industry. You're going to have to separate yourselves and give that client that overall experience, that long-term trust that they have that person to rely on,
Right.
versus just, point and click something over a website and deal with the chatbot, right? So you have to
I
sell that
think that
service.
that's one of those things that is gonna bite the consumer in the foot. It's like we have, in the printing world, when I worked in the printing industry, there were a lot of, there were a lot of brands out there that were like, oh, these printers are getting, they're wide format printers, so they're big, and they like these are getting easier. I'll just bring this in house. We'll hire because we're spending so much money on printing, and we would see constantly in the years I worked there, brands bring it in house and then it go back out out because it's a lot harder than you think it is. Just the same thing with the consumers. They think design is just picking beautiful things, but it's so much more than that. It's really understanding, you know, all of the quality of the products. And so it can look good online, just like anybody can see. Like you can order something from Shein that looks like a beautiful Chanel outfit, and you get it and it's like Barbie plastic material.
Right.
And
Right.
it's those kinds of quality issues that I think will still plague people because they'll be basing it on a photo and price rather than actual, you
So
know,
far, Timu cabinets, yeah.
little cabinets. Oy, oy, let's hope not. Let's hope not. If there's one piece of advice you could offer to designers, builders, and homeowners about cabinetry selections, what would stand and making them stand the test of time? What would that be?
It comes down to probably like some more working with a trusted designer, a trusted local
Trusted
manufacturer.
advisor,
Yes, that's
like
it exactly.
Jonathan.
That's helpful. Yeah. And having that person that, is going to stand behind their product that, brands come and go, but then having that connection that somebody's going to help you out if something happens down the road is big, and that's something I would say that's the biggest thing. There are a number of different materials that are good. There are particle cabinets that are well built. There are plywood cabinets that are well built. And there's part of board that's not well built. There's plywood that's not well built, right? So just saying something's all wood doesn't mean it's going to be a high quality. It's going to last you forever. I've seen some really poor quality plywood that delaminates and looks really bad, especially some of the import plywood that's super affordable, but it's affordable for a reason, right? Some
Right.
really good imported plywood. We've got some great domestic plywood as well, and we've got some really bad domestic plywood. So it's just knowing, having those trusted sources that you can rely on that, are going to give you the type of product that, you can trust is going to last. But there's not a specific construction, or thing to look for, but again, it comes down to the people you're working with. Right.
The advisors that you need to have in your Rolodex and in your phone, programs.
Right.
You can give a quick text and say, hey, I'm looking at this. Does this look like something that would be good for my client? This is about their budget, that kind of, or do you have a better solution? Those kinds of, and when it boils down in this industry, I find that overwhelmingly, even though we're online a lot, even though we're in each other's DMs and whatnot a lot, it's really the relationship. I mean, you and I have known each other a really long time. I 100% trust you on anything that comes to cabinetry. I think that all of our designers should just absolutely trust you when it comes to cabinetry. But it's those relationships. Do not give up the relationship, because that at the end of the day, when you have a client's budget in your hand and you're being tasked with spending it responsibly, doing those quick checks to make sure you're doing the right thing and that you're spending that wisely, and you're not going to be dealing with a problem down the road, and
Sure.
having some great advice like you've given today, like buying those extra cabinets. I mean, I hadn't really heard that, and I think that that's a really really fantastic idea for those designers, because it's showing the client that you care about that investment just as much as they do, you know. So I love that. Thank you so much, Jonathan. This has been fantastic, and I'll give everybody all of your information. We're going to make sure you get some clips, and people have a link to follow you and connect with you so that they can use you as the resource that you are.
Thank you. And I appreciate all you're doing. And, that's just going back to what you were saying. I mean, you're a trusted, resource in the interior design community. And, recently with the person that's going through those legal challenges, and
Oh
being
yeah.
able to bring that out to a group and be able to talk through it and maybe come up with a way that others need to protect themselves through their contracts and things like. So, those type of people, like yourself and, that's the people that need, designers need to lean on so that they can, have that resource to fall back on when they run into challenges.
So,
And maybe
so isolated
avoid some of these challenges to
sometimes.
start by having the right written contracts and the right partners you're working with. Right.
Absolutely. And I think that always having that independent sounding board of,
Mhm.
to make sure you're on track, you're making the right decisions, because it can be such an isolating industry. I mean, it
Right.
really, you do feel alone sometimes in these decisions, but you don't have to. There are some fantastic resources. There are some fantastic friends you can make in this industry who are, you can call and say, "Hey, what do you think about this? How do you think, what should I do about this?" And they are there to give you those opinions. And that's the wonderful thing about this industry. I think that, when I first started, I think a lot of people felt like it was very closed off, but the more we've been working through interior design community, the more I hear everyone feel like they have those connections and they have those friendships. And it just makes, honestly, doesn't make market so much more fun
Yeah, exactly.
too.
Sure. The connections like a kid is. I mean, going in and I mean, you're walking down the aisle and there's 150 to 200,000 people, whatever the final numbers end up being, and you get a tap on the shoulder. You see somebody you haven't seen in 5 years, or you see somebody that you talk with all the time on social media, but you don't see in person because they're across the country, and those
Right.
connections are great. And then and they'll reach out, say, hey, I need to know, what are you seeing right now of this, or what would you use for this or that. It's great to have those connections, and I lean on other people as well for the same things. I don't know everything. And that's having those connections is how you learn and how you can share with other people as well.
And you grow and they get
Exactly.
stronger, more and more knowledge. That's the Thanks so much. I'll make sure everybody has your links and they can follow you.
Yeah.
Uh,